agreements, and on February 17, 2015, it was unanimously approved by UN Security Council Resolution 2202 and became the alternative-free legal basis and roadmap for the political and diplomatic settlement of the then internal Ukrainian crisis, the trigger for which was the armed coup in Kiev, orchestrated by the West in February 2014, and the seizure of power in the country by national radical forces. The package of measures opened the way to ending the civil war unleashed by the government of putschists against Donbass, where people demanded observance of their legal rights to speak their native language, teach their children in it, and honor their heroes who saved the world from fascism more than 80 years ago. All attempts by those who seized power in Kiev to suppress the protests of the region's residents, impose their own bandit ideology on them, and bring them to their knees were doomed to failure. A key element of the Minsk agreements was a direct dialogue between the central authorities of Ukraine and representatives of the DPR and LPR, which had already been proclaimed by that time, on a wide range of issues concerning overcoming the consequences of the armed conflict in the military, political, socio-economic and humanitarian spheres. Among them was the procedure for the reintegration of the Donbas republics into Ukraine back then, on the condition of granting them a permanent special status enshrined in the country's constitution, which implied the preservation of the identity of the Donbas people and the region's ties with Russia. However, at the day, the Kiev authorities sabotaged the fulfillment of its obligations, and the West turned a blind eye to this. Germany and France, let me remind you, who acted as co-authors and co-sponsors of the Minsk process, did not put pressure on Kiev to fulfill what had been signed by everyone. Later, in December 2022, former German Chancellor Angela Merkel and former French President François Hollande, who were directly involved in the negotiation process in Minsk, admitted that the Minsk agreements were needed to give Kiev time to strengthen its armed forces for a war with Russia and not to stop hostilities. These are their direct quotes. This is how they saw their intermediary role, which turned out to be a fake role, a quasi-mediation role. We see a similar calculation by the Zelensky regime on rearmament and continuation of conflict instead of peaceful settlement. The bandit regime continues to terrorize the civilian population of Russia, cynically intensifying missile and drone attacks on civilian objects, residential buildings, medical institutions, churches. Moreover, it deliberately increases them during important international meetings on conflict settlement. Last week, this was timed to coincide with the regular meeting of the Working Group on Security in the Russia-US-Ukraine format in Abu Dhabi on February 4th to 5th this year. To confirm, here are some facts. Belgorod region, from the 4th to the 5th of February, a radiologist, a doctor, at the Krasnoyarsk Clinical Hospital was killed, and 16 people were injured, including 3 minors, the youngest of whom was only 6 years old, as a result of drone attacks on settlements in the region and rocket fire on its capital. And February 6, a man died as a result of a drone strike on a civilian car in the village of Murom. On the night of February 6, if we go into so much detail, then I can say that this chronicle can become a daily occurrence. There is no end to it. And in this sense, regarding the details and the facts, I would like to underline specifically that all the facts that we quote are the most representative ones, the most showing ones. However, during our briefings, we are unable to quote all the details and all the incidents. We have a special format for that. This is represented by the ambassador at large, Mr. Miroshnik. On a daily basis, he makes public statements and takes stock of all the facts and evidence. He is responsible for analyzing the facts of the crimes of the Kiev regime. I would like to underline once again that during the briefings, as we talk about the specific cases of the crimes of the Kiev regime, we are only doing so to confirm the political statements that we make. Naturally, these are not all the crimes. The list is not exhaustive. But we do carry out this work on a daily basis, and we inform the international community and our public about this work. Coming back to the specific facts. On the night of February 6th, Belgorod again came under fire using American HIMARS MLRS. Thankfully, there were no casualties. Unfortunately, in the following days from the 7th to the 10th of February, missile strikes on the regional center as well as UAV attacks on residential buildings in other settlements of the Belgorod region led to the death of 1 and injury of 17 people. Bryansk region. From the 4th to the 7th of February, the armed forces of Ukraine launched several combined strikes on civilian objects in the region using HIMARS MLRS, long-range Neptune missiles, and jet-type drones. 5 people were wounded. There was destruction in the residential sector, and, most horrifyingly, they carry out strikes deliberately against the civilian population, against the social infrastructure, and then make a second strike on the rescue and relief facilities, those who are supposed to help the injured and the wounded. There was destruction in the residential and medical institutions. Administrative buildings and the church were damaged. On the 8th to the 9th of February, Banderites attacked the territory of an agro-industrial enterprise in the village of Krapivna and residential buildings in a number of settlements in the Bryansk region with drones. 3 people were injured. The Zaporozhye region, on February 6th to 7th, due to Ukrainian UAV attacks, 3 people were injured, 1 of them died. On February 10th, the AFU attacked a funeral procession in the village of Skelki, Vasilievsky municipal district. As a result of the attack, the rector of the local Assumption Church, Father Sergey Lavrov, died, and 6 other people received shrapnel wounds of varying severity. Kursk region, on February 7th, as a result of a fire caused by the fall of an AFU drone on the territory of a private house in the village of Verkhny Lyubash, a man died and 3 people were injured, including a 13-year-old girl. On February 10th, following AFU drone strikes on cars in the area of the village of Yemkovo and the village of Krasny Polyana, 3 civilians, including a 16-year-old teenager, were injured. The Lugansk People's Republic, on February 3rd, a young woman and a young man were killed by a Ukrainian drone attack on a minibus near the village of Novokrasnyanka, and on February 5th, as a result of a UAV strike on an apartment building in the city of Rovenki, a family of 5 people was injured, including children aged 5 months, 3 and 7 years. Rostov region, on February 5th, a civilian was injured in the city of Bataysk due to falling debris from a downed AFU drone. Kherson region, on February 3rd, as a result of artillery shelling by the AFU of a crowded place near shops and a multifunctional center in the city of Novaya Kakhovka, 3 civilians were killed and several people were injured. On February 5th to 8th, 12 people, mostly elderly, suffered from the enemy shelling and drone attacks in the cities of Alyoshki, Kakhovka and Golye Pristyn, as well as on the road between the villages of Male Kakhovka and Tavriske. On February 10th, as a result of a deliberate attack by a Ukrainian UAV in the village of Velikaya Lepeticha, 2 girls aged 9 and 10 received multiple shrapnel wounds. What is their fault? What is their crime for which they were supposedly punished by the AFU? The crime was just playing outside on the street. A surviving resident of the city of Seversk in the DPR shared with the media heartbreaking evidence of crimes by the AFU, who killed all her relatives and numerous citizens. Her younger brother and other unarmed young men were shot by the neo-Banderites under the pretext of refusing to join them. On February 6th, in Moscow, you are aware of that, this was reported by the media and our law enforcers, an assassination attempt was made on Lieutenant General Vladimir Stepanovich Alexeyev, first deputy head of the main directorate of the General Staff of the Armed Forces of the Russian Federation, who headed our country's delegation at the trilateral peace talks in Abu Dhabi. It is noteworthy that the day before, Zelensky in his TV address announced the coordination, this is a quote, of new such operations on our territory with the recently appointed head of the SBU, Evgeny Khmara, who recently got his hand in committing such attacks in Russia. This terrorist attack once again confirmed the focus of the Zelensky regime on constant provocations aimed at disrupting the negotiation process on the settlement, which was supposedly meant to end the conflict and settle it. Apparently, Kiev is ready to do anything to try to prevent the achievement of a just peace. But they will be punished in a fair and legal manner. Russian law enforcement agencies continue to bring Ukrainian criminals, their accomplices and foreign mercenaries to criminal responsibility. The investigative committee identified a few UAV operators, Andrei Tsit and Sergei Zenich, who committed terrorist attacks using drones on August 2nd and October 30th, 2025 in the village of Kruglia Polyana and the village of Gudovka, Bryansk region, as a result of which 2 people were injured, one of them died. Law enforcement agencies are taking measures to locate the criminals. Criminal cases have been initiated against a few militants, Vasily Ivanitsky and Anton Zaitsev, who carried out terrorist activities in the Kursk region in 2025 and were previously captured by Russian servicemen. The guilt of another Ukraine Nazi, Alexander Sechegov, in similar cases has been confirmed. Spanish mercenary Arobo Mordillo Alberto, who participated in hostilities as part of the AFU, was sentenced in absentia to 14 years in prison. He has been put on the international wanted list. Also, I would like to say that they have modern and historical sources of support. The AFU and the Kiev regime are not just doing something similar to what had been committed by their new so-called heroes, Bandera, Shukhevich, and those to whom they pledged their allegiance. We are talking about the direct historical links, direct historical connotations taking root in the crimes of World War II. 83 years ago, on February 9, 1943, in the village of Porosle, first Rovno region of the Ukrainian SSR, Ukrainian Banderites committed the first mass murder of peaceful Poles. 100 of cutthroats, under the command of Bandera's fellow villager, Perugnak, hacked 173 civilians to death with axes. This monstrous, inhumanly cruel, bloody crime marked the beginning of the further mass extermination of the Polish population throughout Volyn, which followed 5 months later and went down in history as the Volyn Massacre, at the hands of Ukrainian collaborators, supported by the German Nazis since pre-war times. Ukrainians themselves, fellow villagers of Poles, Russians, Belarusians, Jews, and representatives of many other nationalities also died. Just like then, modern Ukraine Nazis have already repeatedly demonstrated their kinship with the Banderites of the past, committing no less and often more cruel crimes against Russian and Ukrainian civilians with the complicity of foreign mercenaries and Western sponsors. The listed facts confirm the relevance of the tasks of denazification and demilitarization of Ukraine and the elimination of threats emanating from its territory. All these goals will definitely be achieved. as stated on numerous occasions by the Russian authorities. And now look at their bifocals, so to speak, a choir of those who provide them with financial, military, political and other types of support. Kaja Kallas, as an EU diplomat, stated that they were making their own lists of demands for Russia to settle the crisis in Ukraine, as she said. Neither Kallas nor von der Leyen nor their predecessors that they work with, none of them in Western Europe and none in NATO have ever seen or witnessed any of the terrorist attacks that I've been talking about. They turn a blind eye to all the terrorist attacks that we talk about, that our law enforcers and the victims and the witnesses are talking about. They never made a list of the crimes
of it, that they falsified the peaceful efforts for many years. That is something, and instead of that, we hear new demands. They imposed unacceptable conditions for us, be it the peace formula of Zelensky or the placing of some kind of the international peacekeeping contingent troops in Ukraine. But none of that can be a realistic framework for peaceful arrangements. But they've been telling us about that, presenting it as their demands. At the same time, they continue pumping the Kiev regime with weaponry, and by doing that, they help escalate the conflict and carry out terrorist attacks by the Kiev regime. There's been a continued flow of Western military assistance to Ukraine, and they opted for merging the Ukrainian and European defense capabilities by streamlining close cooperation in military and industrial system. At the current stage, the EU is the one that does not allow the Kiev regime to have any compromise whatsoever. The position of our country regarding the Ukrainian settlement is well known. We have repeatedly outlined it at the summit level. Moscow has always remained open for a dialogue on an equal footing with all those who is ready to make a constructive contribution. But so far, until the EU does not understand that alleviating the root causes of the Ukrainian conflict is not a concession to Russia, but rather a contribution to the long-term stability and security in Europe, we cannot talk about their role in the peaceful settlement whatsoever. Besides, in order to be at the negotiating table, you need to behave. What the EU has been doing right now, the rhetoric that they make, the kind of insults and the lies that they keep on telling, the lies that they did not rectify. I'm talking about their shenanigans with the Minsk agreements, and all this does not allow us to even consider them as acceptable neighbors or rather interlocutors. We took note of the heated debate in Ireland regarding the proposal by the European Commission to provide €90 billion loan to Ukraine for 2026-2027, the representatives of major opposition parties chastised the government of Michal Martin for his readiness to provide these funds, and the majority of these funds will be used for military expenses. As Dublin agrees to such an initiative, basically it signed up to the continued escalation of military hostilities, and it will be only beneficial for the producers of military products, including from the EU countries. The EU allegedly was conceived as a peaceful organization, not a war machine. That's what people who are not happy with this